seen a lot of reform, 10,000 police officers, improvement in terms of their vehicles, revision of their curriculums. But then the question is, have we changed when we look at the extrajudicial killings before the 2010 Constitution and now? Have we experienced a change as a result of our Constitution? And we have all these organs and safeguards in the Constitution. And then lastly, I cannot miss saying this, Frida, because I'm very passionate about it. The notion and aspiration of our Constitution was inclusion of the people, representation of the people to include everybody, and looking back at the various groups that were left behind. Particularly, I'm talking about the women and the whole representation issue. Our Constitution is very clear. 2/3 gender principle, basically saying not more than 2/3 of one gender can be in any elective or appointive body. Very clear in the Constitution, but very emotive. And up to now, 8 years down the line, it's still an aspiration. Never been realized. The courts have declared themselves severally, but Parliament has chosen to ignore a constitutional right and even court orders coming from one arm of the government. And that's the reality, that in a society that have more than half of the population as women, we still cannot be able to bring ourselves that we need women representation in Parliament. So I don't know whether the referendum is going to address that or it's going to remove that, and it's going to be a clawback on a gain that our mothers fought very hard. And I think as human rights practitioners, as scholars, we must protect the gains that are in our Constitution. If there is a referendum, we cannot go back. We can only move forward. And that is why, just to wind down, is to say that if there is a referendum, the framing of the questions needs to be people-oriented, because that was the aspiration of the people. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mushimuti. Our discussants today and our speaker, from what they have said today, if you're listening keenly, you realize that they are saying there shouldn't be a referendum. Why we have not achieved what was meant to be achieved by the Constitution. I'd like them to answer today, because they have all asked the same questions about, or they have talked about the same problem of what has not been done. How can we then go forward from here? We have a beautiful Constitution. We know what needs to be done through the Constitution, but it hasn't been done. So what do we need to do? Some more to have it implemented. And then I'll let everyone else ask questions quickly, and then we can move on. So my question to Professor Yash.
You mean how one can...
Yes, my question is, after, and any of you can also answer that, is what do we need to do to move forward from where we are now?
Well, I have thought about it a lot. Haven't come to any real conclusion. But most of the time I spent is with civil society. And they're all, of course, very keen that the Constitution should spread throughout the country. But we are not doing very much about it. As far as the politicians are concerned, that little contact I've had with them is that they don't really care. They are looking for their own advantages and and they negotiate for that or fight for that in the jobs. But the more they fight, the more other people get deprived of that. I think the number of ways in which we can make people aware of these rights. When I finished this work, and I was asked by the then Minister of maybe human rights, no, not human rights, but one of the key ministries, I can't forget her name. And he said to me, he was a law trained himself, that would I help to do documents talking about explaining the Constitution, and then help to get it disseminated. And I said, I'll begin with primary school kids, and we'll move from there. And his secretary, who's now the Secretary of Education, was asked to work with me so that we could make speed. Unfortunately, he died shortly after that, and then nobody has shown any interest. I asked some other ministers, why don't you do something? And I was quite horrified to know that in all the years that students go through, they haven't a clue what the Constitution is. So I think that we can do, or we can lobby for that. And then I think we can create, there are many groups in my work in NGOs. I see lots of small groups that we don't know very much about, and they don't have access to the kind of information that we have. I think we ought to assist them, engage with them, and so that they can pass the message to their own community. I think what we haven't done in this area is at the political level. I think there are very few parties which have the least interest in human rights. There are a number of NGOs in Mombasa, etc., who are very committed and are working on that or protesting when there is a violation. But I don't think even they are going out, except a few groups like yours, who take this message to them that these are your rights and you must insist on that. You must tell your member of parliament that unless this is done, they won't get the vote. I think a lot more information should be disseminated. What are the remedies? One could ask our diplomatic friends to put pressure on a government and say, if you're not doing this, we're not going to get involved in your work. So, I can't think more concretely than these provisions, but I do think that students, young students, should be introduced to this. There should be books, there should be figures of the kind that you are giving us, so people can see how they have been deprived. And I'm afraid I know my friend here is a great expert, and he is going to tell us.
Just to add, when you have a problem, you must give it a scientific solution. And the first thing is a diagnosis. And we have diagnosed that the problem in Kenya is not the Constitution. So once you do that, the methodology is correct. We don't want a referendum. So don't make the work of politicians very easy by joining them to preach mediocrity. Tell them that you don't understand the problem. So we reject the fact that the referendum is the problem. For changing the Constitution is not the problem. The problem is we don't have respect for the rule of law. We don't even respect our own Constitution, And since we don't respect it, we are not likely to respect even the other one. So, reject this, so then it comes to the prescription after the diagnosis. So the prescription is, let's make life very difficult for the political class. So let's not join them. Let's oppose this referendum, and that by opposing this referendum story, that is the only way we shall now make them see that the problem lies elsewhere. And once they recognize that, then we talk about things like implementation or solve. Because when we preach, Frida, when we preach about implementation, people don't even understand what you're talking about. And you need to be aware, it's an education process, like Prof is saying. We need to tell our people, under Article 3 of this Constitution, all of us have a duty to protect this Constitution. So you take responsibility and explain, for example, why do we have a ward administrator for the governor and a chief? Why, you know, these are very simple things. Because they are earning salary from the same taxpayer. What is it that the ward administrator can do? You are serving the same people that the chief can do. So retain one. The principle of representation and devolution was that the two governments should speak in harmony. The former provincial administration should be harmonized in the first 5 years after 2010 to make sure that after 5 years it's harmonized with the new constitution. What has happened is the national government is competing to install people of the national government to compete with administrators in the counties. You are serving the same people. Why do we have these county regional commissioners? Then you complain about a wage bill. So you need to pick up the challenge and explain to people that in this place where you're selling vegetables, why do you have a chief and why do you have a ward rep? So the ward administrator, what is the ward administrator doing for you? So we must pick up that. So let us make life difficult, and once we make life difficult for the politicians, we shall now tell them that the problem lies everywhere and that they will join us to solve the problem, namely implementing the constitution correctly. When we are satisfied that the implementation is okay, then we can now say what else can be done as she has put it, we improve on what we have fully implemented. But midway right now, these guys just want to destroy this constitution so that they take us back to 1965.
Thank you very much, Professor Yash and Professor Kisiangani. Now I'm going to open. Wow, there are so many hands that are up. We have two microphones, that and that. And we'll take 5 questions first, and then we take another round. Yeah? So please pass the microphones.
Hi. Yes. I know that you're very young, an artist. And I think we Kenyans like to beat things a beach around. Because the problem is even this constitution, it lacks one person who is a decision maker. It lacks how we can have one decision maker. And the country which are faring well in this world, par-governance, they are a country with monarchy or communism. This type of democracy we have here, it cannot work. Because this constitution agitates for 3 arms of government with almost equal power. So when a president makes a decision, judiciary can block him. And he is the one who was chosen by Wajiku. Parliament can block him. So the arrangement of governance is a major problem. And my suggestion is, one power person is a president, draw him administration, National Assembly, draw National Assembly judiciary, and draw judiciary police force. So that when a criminal is arrested, can be apprehended one by one until to the top, and we can know who is failing in between. I went to Bomas of Kenya, the anti-corruption conference, where I saw anti-corruption practicing corruption itself. It was to an extent that President started blaming judiciary, and the judiciary was blaming DCI and the DPP, and finally, even opposition leader, they gang up blaming Parliament. Justin Muturi was there, he blamed the Kenyan. When I questioned Kenya, they blamed the Constitution.
Okay.
Final one is repercussion of refusing 30 arrangement. Repercussion, you have seen Mombasa Road from Chagama to Busia, via Kisumu or via Eldoret. More than 10,000 people have died on that road. But to build it, do courage to avoid machine traveling at a speed of 80 kilometers per hour from opposite direction. Somebody has to go to seek a room so that he can put 10% in his pocket, ignoring all energy, knowledge, and wisdom available here locally. With all tractor loading at national service, you might be the next victim on that road.
Yes. Now,
okay.
I think
one more example.
There are so many people that are waiting.
Mine is more comment than a question.
There are so many people that are waiting to ask, sir. You've asked yours.
Okay,
Yeah.
Shukran. My name is Patrick Kamodo, representing Mudhurwa Resident Welfare Association. First of all, thank you, Professor Yash Palgai, for the commendable work you have done over the years, especially on behalf of people of Mudhurwa. We are really grateful for your input and knowledge. My question goes towards you. Generally, do we like being placed in a chessboard here in Kenya, being played by we as a citizen, as a pawns? Because I understand Commonwealth countries, like they have a peer review. Does this also contribute toward defining how we live here in Africa, especially as a Commonwealth country? So we really like to get input to know the bigger picture. Is it our war, or is somewhere else people are defining what happens here? Secondly, we are against doing a review of constitution, but we really need also to focus the shortcoming on that constitution. You understand the problem we have with the Kenyan border with Uganda is it is not a defined thing, it is a shaky something in drawing. The same with Somalia, the Kenyan border. We find that there was no definition defining how we live in this, the entire country. Lastly.
One question, everyone one question, please.
If I may, my name is Patrick Gadara. I'll just respond very quickly. We've tried dictatorship, it doesn't work, and I think part of the talk that he gave was to show that the reason why we changed the constitution is that we did have that one person who was ruling everything. It did not work for us. My question to you would be, and it's for any of the panelists, when we speak of the constitution's values, there's lots of talk about representation, but not so much about participation. And I'm wondering whether one of the weaknesses of our constitution is, in as much as it's created all these levels of government, which I don't have a problem with, is that it's not really worked to allow Wanjiku to participate in the day-to-day running of these institutions, and we've been relegated to waiting every 5 years to vote in the ballot box, rather than actually go out and influence policies at the time that they are being made and implemented. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Gavi, and I had a question to Professor Kisiangani. He said that we need to strengthen the Senate. My question is, can we make senators not to be politicians? So that, because they are members of political parties, and once they are members of political parties, they'll still have the tyranny of numbers. Then lastly, what Professor forgot to tell you, which I might just add, the reason why I was asking that we should make it that politicians should not earn better than professionals, because I can tell you that in Russia, 1917, Russia's economy was worse than northern Kenya. But due to Lenin and Stalin, they revolutionized and they said we are working in professionals and politicians should not work, so that we can make Kenya a Kenya of professionals and not politicians. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me try to stand up my old bones. I have a couple of questions, actually a comment, but perhaps if you could address it. In order for constitution to be implemented, the people must understand their power and the ability to exercise it. And I think there's a big challenge now in terms of, if you go around the countryside, and I've traveled some, you do not see the people understanding their power. And therefore, the people they elect, in quotes, become the oppressors because they did not exercise their power. So this, to me, is the crux of this question of implementation. I'd like you to comment on it. And the other one is that when you have class differences, as we used to talk about classes, now people do not want to do that, but there's such a thing as a big differential in the political class in what they control in resources and what the people at the grassroots control. And therefore, I don't know if they would have an interest in implementing a constitution that would change that equation. The people have to act.
Who wants to go first?
Thank you very much. I'll start with the last comment, and I have to tie that with public participation and the fact that I cannot exercise the power until I know. And I need to be well informed to be able to effectively participate in decision-making processes and national and government processes. That is lacking. And I have to agree with you that unless we undertake interventions around building the capacity of our Njiku to understand their power in terms of their entitlements, their rights, and information that is being held with what we say the duty bearers. It is only then that we can have adequate public participation. Public participation is one of the key tenets of the Constitution. It is an Article 10 principle. But unfortunately, the extent to which that has been realized is a bit wanting. For the longest time, the government has been coming up with a public participation policy that will entail all that we are talking about and the parameters. The courts have proclaimed themselves on what effective public participation is. But unfortunately, that realization is yet to be felt at the grassroots levels. And one of the progresses that we have had as a constitution, closely tying to public participation, is the access to information. And I need to have information so that I can be able to make good decisions. And we have made progress towards that. The right to access to information is in the Constitution. Parliament has gone ahead to enact an act on how you as a citizen can be able to access information that relates to your rights or the service delivery of the duty bearers. But the question of whether that act is being operationalized is another question. And that is the whole bigger question that we are saying. The implementation is what is lacking. And just a comment on the comment the comment from the first person who asked. I think the problem is impunity and the culture of impunity that is just taking us back to the dark years that we do not want to go. It's not about the system.
And definitely it's not because senators are politicians and the impunity is defined as making mistakes and not expecting it to be punished. That is the culture here. Anybody can cause problems and they know that nothing will happen. So that is what we should be doing. We don't need any more legislation. We need a national conversation and they just get out of this. I don't think I can repeat anything about monarchy and the communism. We are already in a bad situation with this democracy. What about when we create a Hobbesian state? I don't think that is correct. And I think the dispensation we are running through, we are heading towards a more liberal society. We don't want one person to take decisions for us. We don't want a Hitler. We don't want a Mussolini. We want people to make collective decisions and chart their way forward. So taking us back, in fact, if we are to implement our brother's system, we shall be worse off than the Jomo Kenyatta and the Moi state. I don't think I can say any more. But with regards to participation, my brother Kavera, I think we have talked with you. You are already smart and your passion is as good as mine on this. And you have been very clear in the past that you don't think that these politicians are interested in us. You have been very articulate. So, even if the Constitution itself does not say in black and white exactly how the people will participate, I don't think the problem is the Constitution. The Constitution has made the opening part of the Constitution, Article 1 talks about the sovereignty of the country lying in the hands of the people. That is enough statement. So where is the weakness about participation? When you recognize this as an important thing, then as Parliament is supposed to pass laws to realize this sovereignty. So that's where the weakness is. If Parliament had passed the correct laws to implement Article 1, the question you are raising about participation would not come. So it's the problem is at legislative level, but not because the Constitution is not detailed on how we can do participation. So I think people don't understand their power, and again they can only understand their power if at the legislative level we legislate to tell them how they can participate in decision making, and say, rather than saying, so and so has spoken for me. I was in Western Kenya and met somebody who said, I'm opposing the Constitution. Western Kenya means Nyanza and the Western, in the old sense. Then he told me that, why are you opposing the referendum? And yet we know that when this referendum goes through, Raila Odinga will be the Prime Minister. Then in Eldoret, I met another guy who told me that, look, you know why? They want to change the Constitution because they want to prevent William Ruto from becoming the president. Now, when do you think like that? And this is the thinking that you have seen this kind of people thinking. When you attack the presidential system, you are attacking Ruto. When you attack the parliamentary system, you are attacking Raila Odinga. What sort of national naivety is this? And that's where the problem is. So we need information, we need to tell our people. The debate has been lost because you think you don't have power to think for yourself. You think if Ruto tells you you want a presidential system is right. If Raila tells you you want a parliamentary system is right. And if we do that, we shall make mistakes. It doesn't matter how many constitutions we make, we shall go back to square one.
Well, I don't have much to say to add to that. When soon after the Constitution came into force, I and some other civil society people used to go and talk to the committee which was in charge of whatever the issues they were. And we would say, look here, the minister said this, but this is not so good, or this is going to cause hardship. Or even when our own president started to lift all barriers between him and the army and the police and so on. We went to see them and say, you know, this is against the Constitution. People aren't going to be very happy about this. And they met us, you know, with courtesy and yes and yes. And once or twice, the minister rang me and said, that was a good statement you people made. We're going to follow it. Nothing was ever done. So that was very unfortunate. So I think we could do a bit more to create